Hey everybody, this is Pete Bartolozzi welcoming you to another broadcast. We're continuing with the Sower Sows the Word, and in this broadcast we'll begin by taking a look at the seed now that has fallen among the thorns. And we're going to be reading from Matthew chapter 13, verse 7, where it says, "And some seed fell among the thorns, and the thorns sprung up and choked them." And then in verse 22 of Matthew 13, Jesus gives the interpretation saying, "He also that received seed among the thorns is he that hears the word, and the care of this world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and he becomes unfruitful." So we now have the ground where the seed falls among the thorns. Here, the thorns are referred to as being the cares of this world and the deceitfulness of riches. Mark also declares that the thorns are the lust for other things. And Luke says, "And that which fell among the thorns are they which, when they have heard, go forth and are choked with cares, riches, and pleasures of this life." The word unfruitful is a compound word, which is simply an alpha in front of the Greek word for fruit. The word for fruit comes from one of the words for take and specifically means to seize, because when fruit is grown, you go and you grab it, you harvest it. Jesus stated that the kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and the violent take it by force. We seize it. Here, he's telling us that those who let the cares, the deceitfulness of riches, the lust for other things into their lives, they will not take hold of the things of the kingdom. They will not pick of the fruit of the word and taste and see that he is good. Luke says that the fruit of the word brings forth perfection or maturity in our lives. That is, this is the process of bringing forth the fruit of the word, which brings forth maturity in us. Christians who allow the cares, riches, and pleasures to come in, it grow up, and they will not come into a place of growing up, even if they don't leave the church. So let's take a closer look at these things that choke the word in our lives and keep the results of the word from our lives. First, we have the cares of this world. The word care is from the Greek word merimna, and the Strong defines it as solicitude. My dictionary defines solicitude as uneasiness of mind due to fear. Strong goes on to say that this word comes from another Greek word through the idea of distraction. In other words, the purpose of the cares is to distract us from the word, getting us to take our attention off the word. The word it comes from is the word merizo, and is defined as to part, that is, to disunite, and was translated as divide. And in turn, merizo comes from the word meros, defined it as division, that is, to divide, and is once translated as peace. Now that's peace as in pieces parts, not peace as in Prince of Peace. And so, in putting it in modern day phraseology, it's talking about those things that cause us to go to pieces, as we've heard some say. Cares, then, is in reference to those things that we feel like pulling our hair out over. Those things that we might say things like, "I can't take it anymore," where the mind is going in all directions and can't handle the thoughts. Those things that can cause us to mentally go to pieces. What are we talking? We're talking about anxiety and worry. Even the word care in my dictionary is defined as an oppressed mental condition. 1 Peter 5:7 tells us to cast our care upon him. The word care there comes from this word merimna. In other words, the very things that cause us to feel like we're going to pieces and want to say things like, "I'm pulling my hair out over this." These are the very things we are to cast upon the Lord. Therefore, we are not to worry anymore. Those things that worry us are to be given to him. And if we truly have given them to him, then we don't have them anymore and are not to worry. If we don't give them to him, then these worries or fears will be the very things that will distract us from the word, and then we will not receive the results of the word in our lives, and it won't be God's fault. The next thing that is described as being thorns is that choke the word is deceitfulness of riches. Now, first of all, this is not speaking against having riches. It is not saying that riches in itself is deceitful, but there is a deceit that can come with riches that we are to avoid. The word deceitfulness is from the Greek word apate, and the Strong's defines this word as being a delusion. The word deceitfulness, uh, being defined as delusion, and delusion then is defined as a persistent error of perception occasioned by false belief. Again, this is not what riches are, but what can accompany riches. Thinking that riches bring happiness is the biggest of those delusions. As 1 Timothy 6:10 declares, the love of money is the root of all evil. Note that it doesn't say that money is the root of all evil, but that the love of money is the root of all evil. It also does not say that to have money is to love it, but that we are to avoid the opportunity of allowing the love of it to come into our lives. Besides, you can have no money and have the love of it. That's why people steal it and even kill for it. Some have set up elaborate schemes to cheat people out of their money, and they are doing it because they love money and don't have any or are lusting for that much more. From this idea, many have preached that riches are evil and God doesn't want you rich. They use things like the rich young ruler who Jesus instructed to go and sell all he had to give to the poor and then to come be his disciple, to say that God doesn't want you to have anything in order to follow him. But let's look at this verse in Matthew 27, verse 57. It says, "But when even was come, there came a rich man of Arimathea, named Joseph, who also himself was Jesus' disciple." Now, I have always had it emphasized to me that Joseph of Arimathea was a rich man and that Jesus was buried in a rich man's tomb. But notice that it doesn't only say that he was a rich man, but that he himself was a disciple of Jesus. Here, the man was rich and yet a disciple of Jesus, which means that Jesus didn't ask him to give all he had to the poor and then be poor himself in order for him to be a disciple of Jesus. It is obvious then that the issue with the rich young ruler was not money. Otherwise, this would have been the same case for Joseph of Arimathea, that he would have had to give up everything in order to be Jesus' disciple. But notice, Joseph was still rich after being a disciple. The issue then brings us back to the fact of the love of money, not money itself. Joseph obviously didn't have a problem with the love of money. He loved Jesus more, to where if Jesus would have asked him to give it all, he would have, and Jesus knew it. Jesus saw the problem with the rich young ruler and asked him to give all that he had to root out the love of money in order to make Jesus his first love. And if he was willing, maybe Jesus would have actually, had him not go through with it. But we wouldn't know, of course, unless the young man was willing to do what Jesus said. And Joseph, no doubt, supported Jesus' earthly ministry and supported the ministry that Jesus set in the church after his ascension. Then the real issue is not that one can't have money to be a disciple of Jesus, but that one cannot have the love of money and be a disciple of Jesus. Or at very least, they cannot fully be a disciple of Jesus, because disciple means to learn, believe, and follow the teachings of another, and Jesus did not and does not teach the love of money. And then there's the lust for other things. The word lust here is the Greek word epithumia, which is of the words most commonly translated as lust in one form or another throughout the New Testament. The Strong's defines the root of these words as to set the heart on, that is, a longing or craving desire. Even though this could include the love of money, after mentioning the deceitfulness of riches, it says, and the lust for other things. He mentions the love or lust for money by itself because it's the most predominant lust. And when a lust is for anything that costs money, they lust for the money to do that thing. What this is bringing out is that a man's longing desire for something can become stronger than his desire for Jesus, than his desire for the things of God. For example, I knew a man uh, who would send his wife and kids to church, but stay home himself to catch the ball game. Sports became a greater desire to him than Jesus. Are sports wrong? No. But a man putting his desire for sports above Jesus is. Jesus, speaking to the church at Ephesus, said that you have left your first love, and was specifically speaking of their works. Their desire for other things got them to lose focus from what God had originally called them to fulfill. They would have to lose some clear sight of the one they loved in order for them to lose sight of his original calling. There was another man who told his pastor when spring came around that he wouldn't see him again until fishing season was over or until the fall. And sure enough, that pastor didn't see that man in church until fall came around. Now, there's nothing wrong with fishing or any other outdoor activities, but is it more important to you than God? When the desire for something is greater than your desire for God, this is where it becomes a lust for other things. It could be a hobby, TV, or any other pleasures in life. And again, there is nothing wrong with enjoying the pleasures of life as long as it doesn't become more important to you than God. In Romans chapter 12, verse 1, it says, "Wherefore, seeing we are also compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin that does so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us." We are not just instructed to get rid of sin, but also of what Paul calls weights. You see, a runner will sometimes wear weights around his legs while in training, but on the day of the race, he will remove them that he may run with greater freedom and speed. I believe what Paul is referring to here is the weights. The weights he's referring to is the desire for other things. He doesn't call them sins because he listed sins separately. He's referring to those things that become greater desire to us in our lives than God. Things that are not sin in themselves, but things that can become consuming of our time, attention, and even money and away from God. Paul refers to them as runner's weights. They wear us out faster. They cause us to drag in the race. They distract us from the race. And they keep us from putting our full effort into the race God has called us to run. Doing and enjoying these things, the things in life, doesn't prove that you have weights, but their priority in your life does. Now, whether you have weights in your life is between you and God. If you're seeking to know Him in your life, He will let you know what is becoming a weight in your life. One of the first things that God dealt with me about when I was a teenager, I had a coin collection. And I found myself desiring to work on my coin collection than to go to church. I realized it was becoming a problem and gave it up. Nothing wrong with a coin collection. There's nothing wrong with any kind of collection at all, stamp collection or whatever else you might collect, as long as it doesn't become more consuming than your desire for God. One way of judging whether you have a weight or not is if you're afraid that He might ask you to give up something that you don't want to. In such a case, that will usually be the thing He asks you to give up. And if you're willing to give it up, He may tell you it's fine to continue to do it. He just wants to see that you're willing to keep your desire for Him in check. And your desire for other things, of course, in check, I should say. Now, first of all, it says that these things, which are referred to as thorns, choke the word so that it becomes unfruitful in their lives. The word choke that we see in the three accounts recorded of the parable of the sower from Matthew, Mark, and Luke, there are two Greek words used, not necessarily two different, because both of these words are from the same root and primarily mean the same thing. The root word is penego, which the word these all come from is penego, which in turn comes from the word peneo, meaning to breathe hard. Penego itself is defined as to wheeze, as if breathing hard or hard to breathe, with the idea of the air being cut off. Thus, it means to strangle. And it's not only translated as to choke, but also with the phrase to take by the throat. In Matthew 13:22 and in Luke 8:14, where Jesus is giving the interpretation of the parable, the word "soon" is used. Penego here is prefixed by the word "soon," meaning union, together with, and in compounds, as is the case here, "soon" brings out the idea of completeness. Thus it means to strangle completely. So the purpose of the thorns is not just to stunt our growth in the word, even though it may do that too, but its intent is to completely strangle the word of God out of our lives. So let's not give thorns any place. The Strong's goes on to say that it literally means to drown. Well, when the word sown, which is sown, is saying one thing, and the cares of the world is saying another, and you let the cares of the world in, then what the cares are saying will drown out the word, just as we use the phraseology today of drowning out something. In Matthew 13:7 and Luke 8:7, where Jesus is telling the parable to the multitudes, it is the word apanego, try to get that out right, in which penego is prefixed by the word apa, meaning off, and thus means to choke off. The Strong's also brings out again the idea of to drown with this word as well. So, showing that these two words primarily bring out the same thought. That's why they're used interchangeably between the parable and the interpretation of the parable. And Mark just uses sum penego in both the parable and the interpretation. And I'm going to bring, to a close teaching about the thorns. I think we understand that. And I just kind of want to conclude by talking about the good ground, and which means I might conclude a little early. I don't have a whole lot to say about this because it speaks for itself for the most part. And it says, and then of course, Mark tells us that those who bring forth fruit, some 30, some 60, some 100-fold. But Matthew here gives the percentages in opposite order, not that the order is of great importance. However, when I look at the Greek words in my interlinear in Matthew's, it gives just a little extra thought on the subject. So in translating the words that I see in the Greek in Matthew, it would sound like this: and it produces indeed 100-fold, but another 60, but another 30. It seems his emphasis is on the one who produces 100% of the capacity of the word, but then declares that there were those, some who will not produce as much. The thought here is that the word has the potential, the same potential of production with everyone it is sown in, but not all will allow the full potential of the word to produce fruit in their lives. Jesus here seems to emphasize that the one who produces 100-fold of the word by saying indeed, but then simply just acknowledging the fact that some will produce less by saying but some 60, but 160, but 130, giving less emphasis to it. Now, the other things allowed in will keep fruit from coming, but them being partially let in can stifle it as well, only if we let it. Now, don't feel condemned if you don't think that you're producing 100-fold. That's not the purpose of what I'm teaching, nor is it the purpose of what Jesus said. Just keep applying yourself to the application of God's word in your life, and know that if you don't produce 100%, that Jesus still listed the 30 and 60% as good ground. And so he still deems you good ground why? Because you're producing. So again, don't feel condemned if you don't feel you're producing 100%. Not at all. Just keep applying yourself, because even 30 and 60 is good ground because it produces. But let's just keep 100% at least as our goal of what we'll shoot for. Now, Word of Faith tends to emphasize the 100-fold financial return in the reading of this. But notice that finances are not mentioned at all, just the subject of the word. Thinking only in terms of prosperity then can give us a lopsided view of what this parable is all about. The production of the fruit of the word in our lives is what this is talking about, period. Even Kenneth E. Hagin, who was a big giver, stated that he had never received 100-fold off his giving. And yet I heard him say that God had made him a millionaire. So, all of the word sown is to produce 100-fold in our lives, whether it's renewing the mind, perfect peace, count it all joy, by his stripe I'm healed, etc., 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 as well as my God shall supply all your need. Every aspect of his word sown in us, of casting down imagination, putting on the armor of God, living by faith, walking in love, and so on, needs to produce 100-fold in our lives, to have the full experience of the word in our lives, to fully taste and see that the Lord is good. And I'm going to conclude there with the parable of the sower, or this session I entitled this, The Sower Sows the Word, which is the beginning of the phrase of the parable of the sower. I trust this has been a blessing to you. I trust this helps you. I trust that at least if it's at least a refresher course to you, if you haven't heard teaching along these lines in a while. Excuse me. Here, I'm starting to conclude and my throat's feeling a little dry. And I trust that maybe I added just a little bit more thought to help enlighten that much more concerning the parable of the sower, this foundational kingdom principle where everything is sowing and reaping. So until next broadcast, I pray that you all be blessed.